Let me ask you something. You ever sit down to do something important, a project, an assignment, something that actually matters to you, and then 2 hours later you're watching videos about how submarines work, and you haven't done a single thing? And the worst part, you knew you were doing it, you watched yourself do it, and you still couldn't stop. That's not laziness, that's not poor time management, and it's definitely not a character flaw. What's actually happening is a war inside your brain, and your brain is losing on purpose. Here's what the science says. Procrastination is not a productivity problem. It's an emotional response. When you look at a task that feels threatening, overwhelming, high stakes, or just uncertain, your brain's alarm system fires up and hijacks the part of you that actually wants to work. You don't need a better planner. You don't need another app. You need to understand what's happening neurologically and then fix it. And the most effective toolkit for fixing it wasn't invented by a Silicon Valley startup or a modern psychologist. It was built by a slave, an emperor, and a general over 2,000 years ago. Today we're going to walk through 3 Stoic techniques that modern neuroscience has essentially confirmed. Not as ancient wisdom that sounds nice, but as practical, repeatable methods you can use today, starting with the next task you've been avoiding. Let's get into it. The problem. Why your brain treats your to-do list like a threat. Before we get to the solutions, you need to understand what's actually going wrong. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. When you look at a daunting task, let's say writing a research paper, or starting a business plan, or even just sending an email you've been putting off, your brain doesn't see a task, it sees a threat. Specifically, a region deep in your brain called the amygdala, which evolved to protect you from physical danger, fires a stress signal. It can't tell the difference between a deadline and a predator. Both feel dangerous. Both trigger the same response. That stress signal floods your body with cortisol, the stress hormone. And here's where it gets interesting. Cortisol doesn't just make you feel anxious. It physically suppresses activity in your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning, decision-making, and starting tasks. So the part of you that wants to work gets chemically shut down by the part of you that's scared. And then your brain, desperately looking for relief from that stress, finds it in your phone, in YouTube, in the fridge, in anything that gives you a quick hit of dopamine. The avoidance works in the short term. The anxiety goes away, and your brain files that away. Avoidance equals relief. That's the loop. That's the trap. Psychologists call this emotional avoidance. And the research is overwhelming. Procrastination is correlated not with laziness, but with anxiety, self-doubt, and fear of failure. People who procrastinate most aren't the least motivated. They're often the most emotionally invested, which is exactly why the fear hits harder. Now here's the thing. The Stoics didn't have brain scans. They didn't have cortisol studies, but they were extraordinary observers of human behavior, and they identified this exact pattern. They called it being ruled by pathé, irrational emotional reactions that override your reason, and they spent centuries developing techniques to break the cycle. 3 of those techniques map almost perfectly onto what modern psychology now recommends. Let's go through them one by one. Technique 1. Objective representation. See the task for what it actually is. The first Stoic technique comes from Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, one of the most powerful men in the world, and also someone who apparently struggled to get out of bed in the morning. We know this because he wrote about it in his private journal, which we now call Meditations. Marcus had a practice he called Fantasia Cataleptike, which roughly translates to objective representation. The idea is simple but radical. Strip away every emotional layer you've added to something and describe it only as it actually is. He gives an example in Meditations. He talks about expensive purple robes, the kind that Roman elites spent fortunes on as status symbols. And he says, look at it clearly. It's sheep's wool soaked in the blood of a shellfish. That's it. The status, the prestige, the desirability, none of that is in the object. You added that. Your mind added that. He did this with food, with fame, with power. He kept asking, what is this actually? Now apply that to procrastination. When you write work on thesis in your planner, your brain doesn't read a task. It reads a monument. It reads months of effort, judgment from your professor, the possibility of failure, your entire self-worth. You've turned a task into a symbol, and symbols are terrifying. Marcus Aurelius would tell you to strip it back down. Don't call it work on thesis. Call it open the document and write one sentence. Don't call it start the business plan. Call it write 3 bullet points about what the business does. Don't call it go to the gym. Call it put on shoes and walk to the car. This sounds almost insultingly simple, but the neuroscience backs it up completely. Research on task initiation consistently shows that the most effective way to begin a difficult task is to shrink it to its smallest, most concrete form. Not because small tasks are easier, but because they don't trigger the threat response the same way. A big, vague goal activates your amygdala. A tiny, specific action doesn't. You're not tricking yourself. You're accurately describing reality. Most tasks aren't actually as threatening as your mind has made them. You're just removing the emotional distortion, exactly like Marcus did with the purple robe. The philosopher's version. See things as they are, not as your fear makes them appear. The practical version. Break it down until it sounds boring. Then start. Technique 2, the dichotomy of control. Stop spending energy on things you can't move. The second technique comes from someone with a very different life than Marcus Aurelius. Epictetus was born a slave. He had no wealth, no status, no freedom of movement, and yet he became one of the most influential philosophers in history because he figured out something that most people with every advantage never do. He figured out the only thing any of us actually control. His central teaching is called the dichotomy of control, and it goes like this. There are 2 categories of things in life. Things within your control, your thoughts, your choices, your effort, your attitude, and things outside your control, other people's opinions, outcomes, circumstances, luck. Most of us spend the majority of our mental energy on the second category. Think about how procrastination actually feels. It's rarely just, I don't want to do this task. It's, what if it's not good enough? What if I get a bad grade? What if I put in all this work and it doesn't matter? What if people think I'm not as smart as they thought? You're not afraid of the task, you're afraid of the outcome. And outcomes are outside your control. Epictetus would say, you are draining yourself completely on something you cannot move. No amount of anxiety changes the outcome. It only prevents the effort, which is the one thing that might actually influence it. Here's how to apply this directly. Take whatever you're procrastinating on. Write down every fear or worry attached to it. Then go through the list and label each one. Is this within my control or outside it? I'm worried I won't write it well enough. Within your control. You control the effort and the revision. I'm worried my professor won't like it. Outside your control. You cannot control another person's reaction. I'm worried I'll run out of ideas. Partially within your control. You can research, outline, prepare. I'm worried it won't go viral. Outside your control. Let it go. Now here's the key shift. Redefine what success means for this session. Not, I will finish the project. Not, I will get an A. Those are outcomes. Instead, I will write for 30 minutes with full focus. I will complete 1 section. I will send 1 email. Effort is within your control. Outcomes are not. When you measure yourself by effort, you can always succeed. When you measure yourself by outcomes, you're at the mercy of the universe, and your brain knows it, and it panics. Epictetus lived in chains and found a kind of freedom most people never experience. Not because his circumstances changed, because he stopped fighting the things he couldn't move and put everything into the things he could. That's the technique, not motivation, not willpower, just an honest audit of where your energy is actually going, and redirecting it to the only place it can do any good. Technique 3, PREMEDITATIO MALORUM. What if you visualized failure on purpose? The third technique is the one that surprises people most, because it goes against almost everything modern self-help tells you. You've heard the advice, visualize success. See yourself crossing the finish line. Picture the victory. Feel the feeling. The Stoics thought that was incomplete at best and actively harmful at worst. They practiced something called PREMEDITATIO MALORUM, which translates to the premeditation of evils, the deliberate, calm visualization of everything that could go wrong. Before a battle, a Stoic general would sit quietly and walk through every way the battle could go badly. Ambushes, weather, supply failures, troop morale. not to catastrophize, not to spiral into anxiety, but to prepare. The idea is this: your brain already knows things could go wrong. Pretending they won't doesn't eliminate the fear, it just buries it. And buried fear doesn't disappear. It shows up as procrastination, as avoidance, as the vague dread you feel every time the task crosses your mind. When you bring the fear into the open and examine it clearly, two things happen. First, most fears shrink when you look at them directly. What if I fail? Becomes, okay, if I fail, I revise and try again. That's manageable. The monster under the bed is almost never as bad as you imagined. Second, you can actually plan for obstacles. Modern psychology calls this implementation intentions, if-then planning. If I sit down to write and I feel overwhelmed, then I'll open my outline and just add one bullet point. If I get distracted by my phone, then I'll put it in another room before I start. Research on this is remarkably strong. Studies by psychologist Gabriele Oettingen found that people who only visualized positive outcomes, pure optimism, were actually less likely to achieve their goals than those who combined positive visualization with honest acknowledgement of obstacles. She calls the combined method WOOP, wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. It's essentially premeditation MALORUM with modern branding. So here's the practice. Before you start a work session, take 5 minutes and ask yourself 3 questions. 1. What could realistically go wrong today? Not catastrophically wrong, realistically. Your focus drifts. You get a difficult email, you hit a part of the project you don't know how to do. Write these down. 2. How will I handle each one? Specific answers only, not I'll push through. But if my focus drifts, I'll do 5 deep breaths and reread the last paragraph I wrote. If I hit something I don't understand, I'll spend 10 minutes researching just that piece before continuing. 3. What's the worst realistic outcome if this session goes badly? Usually the answer is, the work takes longer than expected and I try again tomorrow. When you name it, it loses power. You're not being pessimistic, you're being prepared. There's a difference. The Stoics understood that false optimism is fragile. It shatters the moment reality doesn't cooperate. Prepared realism is durable. It bends without breaking, because you already accounted for the difficulty. Putting it together, the Stoic starting ritual. So you have 3 techniques. Here's how to combine them into a simple ritual you can use before any session of focused work. Step 1. Shrink the task. Objective representation. Write down exactly what you're going to do in the most boring, specific, small terms possible. Not work on project. Write, draft the introduction paragraph, or research 3 sources, or fill in the budget column. Make it so small and concrete that your brain can't find anything frightening about it. Step 2. Clarify your circle. Dichotomy of control. Ask yourself, what outcomes am I anxious about that I can't actually control? Name them, then deliberately set them aside. Define success for this session as an effort, not an outcome. I will focus for 45 minutes is success. That's within your control. Lock on to that. Step 3. Stress test it. PREMEDITATIO MALORUM. Spend 3 to 5 minutes asking what could go wrong and writing a specific response for each one. This takes almost no time and radically changes how your brain approaches the session. You're not anxious about surprises because you've already thought through them. Then you start. Not when you feel motivated. Not when the conditions are perfect. Right after the ritual. Because the Stoics understood something that modern productivity culture keeps forgetting. You do not wait for the right feeling. You act and the feeling follows. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. Not as a feeling, not as a mood, as a function." That's the entire philosophy in one line. Here's what I want you to take away from this. The Stoics weren't productivity influencers. They were people dealing with real pressure, slavery, war, empire, loss, who needed frameworks that actually worked under stress. The fact that their techniques align with what neuroscience now confirms isn't a coincidence. It's evidence that they got something fundamentally right about human behavior. Procrastination isn't a moral failure. It's a misfiring threat response, and it has a workaround. See the task clearly. Control what you can control. Prepare for what might go wrong. Those 3 things won't make hard work easy, but they'll make it possible. And possible is all you need to start. If this gave you something useful, subscribe, because this channel is about ideas that have actually been tested by time, not just trending this week. And if you have a task you've been avoiding, close this video and go do the first 5 minutes of it, right now. That's the whole point. See you in the next one.